Hi, in this session, we're going to cover building versus buying, an old problem, new solutions. My name is Tom Natz. I'm Director of Customer Solutions over here at Starburst. I've been around for about 25 years doing data warehousing, ETL, data lakes, all sorts of really, really fun stuff. I've helped build many applications from scratch, and I've also been involved in open source and purchasing off-the-shelf products as well. So the agenda, what we're going to cover here is 30 years later, what has changed. I say 30 years because we've kind of had this little problem of building versus buying. Although things have changed a lot in the 30 years. Right now, the way I see it, there's four main choices, and then we're going to go over short-term and long-term things to consider, and also what's the future hold. So 30 years later, what has changed? I think, what has changed a lot is just a lot more companies out there, a lot more software companies out there, and a lot more solutions, not only just broad solutions, but verticalized solutions as well, like for finance and supply chain. There's a lot of different kind of companies out there. And so it seems like there's a software company that has provided some kind of services to almost every single use case that's out there. And also software development's become a lot more stable. When I remember 20 something years ago, we put an application out there and it would break, it would have all sorts of issues. And I think what's happened is there's a lot of reusable libraries that I've seen out there. So people can get software development from custom or from scratch up a lot quicker than they were before. Also, consumption-based pricing, it applies more pressure on a lot of these software companies, in my opinion. Before we would sell something and, or sell some kind of software and it'd be like a 1 or 2 or 3 year deal. And then, you would provide support and updates. And there wasn't that much pressure, but with consumption and these more of like monthly or quarterly based type software, it puts a lot more pressure on the software company to make sure things are you're innovating, there's new features, bugs are fixed. So I think there's a lot more pressure to do a much better job. And also there's a lot more industry knowledge about migrations and commodity infrastructure. So, before you would have to get some software, you'd have to buy some hardware for it. It would take months to get in. With the adoption of cloud, you can bring up infrastructure very, very quickly. There's a lot of reusable libraries. Plus, there's a vast selection of open source options as well. I think that's kind of the biggest thing that I've seen is usually you can either some of these open source software solutions will give you exactly what you need. Others, you can take them and modify them or customize it. So at least it gives you a head start on some of that. So the way I see it is I did some research and like there's really four main choices right now. The one we're kind of talking about is the build from scratch. So take an application, I have a use case or I have a need or a pain that I need to solve within my company. And I'm going to build the application, all its components from scratch. I need to support the application through the code and uptime, and then provide enhancements, change control, obviously any kind of maintenance on that as well. So bug fixes, not only just enhancements, but bug fixes is a big one. The next one is also building from scratch, but using as a service for components. And this is something, a new term out there that's called FaaS, which is function as a service. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit as well. But really, you're building an application. And not only I was talking about these reusable libraries, but you're also using companies that provide parts of your modules, basically, as you look at it inside of your application. So logging, billing, a lot of these things, these companies have popped up and all they do is they add a value there. So you don't have to build these certain modules within your application. You just kind of like outsource it to another company. And then next we have the existing solutions. So there's thousands of companies out there that provide software. A lot of it's software as a service. Some of it is you install on-prem, on premises basically. A lot of it's more software as a service where it's up in the cloud, it's hosted by somebody else, and it just provides value that way. And then also it might not fit 100% of the use cases needed. So a lot of companies have custom solutions that they're looking for. So some of these software companies don't provide that. They'll provide more general type, accounting, like I talked about before, supply chain, manufacturing, healthcare. So there's more kind of purpose built software as a service companies that I've seen out there. And also it shifts the support and responsibility to the vendor, which a lot of companies do like. It's just somebody else's problem. I can call and yell at somebody else, we used to say, instead of yelling internally. And lastly is open source. This is kind of the big game changer that I've seen in the last 20 years. So there's a lot of these open source companies or solutions out there that really kind of fit some of the use cases or partially some of the use cases that you may have. And then also you need to install, support, and enhance and maintain the solution. So that's the only negative of open source. It is somebody's done a lot of the coding for you. And in the open source, it may be really, really good. It may be not so good. So that's something that to be aware of, but it may give you a start, or it may just do exactly what you may have, like a no frills type of scenario. It may do exactly what you want. And also many companies offering, like my company, Starburst, offering support or enterprise type features on top of these open source. So it really gives you a core base to look at. And then you have a company like ours that provides it, kind of pushes it over the line, right? Support, maintenance, bug fixes, a lot of it support as well. So that's kind of the fourth solution here. So next is, building from scratch. This is kind of one of the most difficult things to do right now. Some companies have a lot of software, like the big FANG companies like Facebook and them, they're basically built from scratch. They do have libraries that they reuse, but they have in-house expertise. And they know that that's part of their business, and they gladly pay for that. And what's nice about that is you can build exactly what you want to your specifications. You don't need to have unnecessary modules or features within the application. You can build it exactly for what you're looking for. And I talked about this before. There's many existing development libraries that act as accelerators, from logging to certain types of logic, infrastructure kind of within your code that has already been written out there that you can use. And also, something to think about is an MVP plus features. So an MVP is a minimum viable product. So what's the minimum I can get out to my end users to make them somewhat happy? And then from there, let's figure out what features that we're going to add. So I'm basically turning my company into a software shop. And for some companies, like I said, no big deal. Some companies just don't want to deal with it. Also, lastly, it's an own asset at that point. You own it. It's yours. You now have to provide support, bug fixes, maintenance. And that's a little bit tougher in this market. You don't have people that are staying at companies very long. So before, we'd have people that were there for many, many years, and you wouldn't have to worry about that because, Phil's always been here and Phil knows the application. He can go fix it for us. That doesn't happen as much anymore. And I have this funny little Dilbert cartoon over here is we need 3 more programmers, and let's just use Agile, because the people think, okay, if you just use Agile, you could throw more people at it or less people at it, and you just use buzzwords, and it'll make things much quicker. Nothing's really changed in that aspect. It's still difficult work to do to basically create your own software and support it. Next is these kind of like building from scratch, like I talked about before, but these functions as service components. I couldn't find a really good list. This is some of them over here. I'm going to go through a little bit on the next slide. But this is kind of becoming really popular, where you have basically modules that you just plug right into your software that you don't even have to worry about. Like a great example is billing and like logging or alerting. Those are kind of like the big ones that we always had to build from scratch. I was doing ETL, data ingestion, data integration for many, many years. I was a contractor, so every company I went to, we always had to like reuse, I mean, not reuse, we used to build this infrastructure from scratch, all the alerting and stuff like that. And then we go to the next company, we kind of reuse the same kind of thing a little bit. You still have to do it from scratch though. So these new kind of companies, they just provide, let's say, billing, like you just send them in usage for customers, and they just take care of everything for you. They go actually bill your customers. There's companies that just do support. There's logging, there's alerting. So it saves valuable time during development. And also monitoring, just the day-to-day aspect of running an application. Some other companies handling that for you. And it offloads a majority of the trivial tasks for an application, like I talked about before, the billing and the support aspect of everything. Alerting is actually a big one as well. So I actually have an example of this. We actually built something within our company at Starburst, and we have an application that we built, but instead of like, in this example, this billing usage I bring up again, there's a company called Metronome. My little window out of the way here so you can actually see it. So Metronome actually provides billing and metering for our customers. So we just send Metronome usage, and they figure out, provide reports. They actually do billing for us. They actually do integration with the different clouds out there, AWS and Azure. So they do a lot of that stuff that would take us months and many people to try to develop ourselves. So it's worth it for us just to have a company like Metronome to handle all that. And then you have something like CockroachDB, like a geo-redundant database. Sure, there's databases out there. We'd have to go install them and implement them. With Cockroach, it's one of those ones, they just handle it for us. They handle, like, if one Well, geo-redundant means they take care of one region goes down. Our data is not lost or we're not have a downtime. So that is just worth it for us. For us to build that ourselves, we'd have to go find experts out there to build all this. We have to maintain it. That is a huge expense for us. Next thing is Datadog. Datadog is really popular about monitoring. I remember when Datadog first came out, said no way anybody's ever going to send their log information to a cloud-based company. I said that, people thought that was crazy. Now they're probably the most popular company out there to do that. So we could have built that ourselves. Again, why would we do that? We can just send logs and it'll actually take care of all the alerting for us. Integrates with a bunch of companies like PagerDuty and that kind of stuff. So a lot of this is just handled for you now. So it makes building an application much, much easier, which obviously, I can attest to using our application on a day-to-day basis. Next is existing solutions. This is probably one of the most popular ones out there because it seems like I saw one the other day for like people that own antique stores. There's an application out there that they just take pictures of their antiques, they put it in there, and it takes care of selling it for them. Puts it on like eBay or something like that. That's something that for that antique owner, for them to develop would be probably impossible for them to develop an application that can do this. So we're all the way down to that level where an antique dealer has multiple choices of these software companies that take care of something that they could probably never do before. There's something from every single industry, from healthcare to transportation to everything, health to supply chain, anything that you can think of. There's usually some kind of an industry covered with a software solution. And then some legacy vendors have now migrated that they were on-prem before, is now they're cloud-based. So you have to be a little bit careful of that because some of this, they literally just picked our server up and put it in the cloud and they called themselves a software-based service out of the cloud. So you have to be careful a little bit about, some companies, just because they're new doesn't mean they're great, but you have to worry about some of those legacy companies out there. Are they really cloud-based, or is it going to be worth your value or not? And also, a majority of the consumption or tier base, which is really nice because that kind of changed. I think Salesforce pretty much started the industry with this, where they were just consumption based. So instead of just buying this huge upfront cost that you have to do and you're hoping that the software works out, is you buy the software, you're paid per month, or you can do yearly base kind of things, but you can really try out the software first, make sure it's what you want. I think that was the biggest change that I've seen in the software industry is really Salesforce going and changing the entire industry on how we actually treat software. And always, this is the big thing. I've done this a lot with companies when I'm looking through them is how do I migrate? If I do need to migrate off this software, can I do it in an easy fashion? Is it going to cost me a bunch of money? Can I even do it? I remember doing some software for a nonprofit running event that happens once a year in Washington State. And we looked through a couple of these companies that just put on races. And one of the biggest things that we saw is a couple of these, there's no way to migrate the data out. So you can put all these people in, you have race day, events, everything, but there's no way to migrate the data out. You could do maybe one row at a time. So that was very, very important to look at is always look a year, 2 or 3 years ahead. This may work great for you now, but what happens if this company all of a sudden goes downhill? I need to switch to something else. How can I get my most prized possession of my application? How do I get it out to the next solution out there? And I included this little graphic over here. If that doesn't make you dizzy, I don't know what will, but that makes me dizzy. That just shows you how many different companies are out there. Some may not be around anymore, but that's something to watch out for. Is have they been around for a while? Can you make sure you go find some referrals for that company? Are they stable? I think that's the most important things to look for. Next is open source. I think this is really kind of taken the industry by storm. It first started off with just some people, having some projects out there that they just put out in the public and say, hey, people can use these. And then companies started getting involved and they got pretty serious about this, where there's somebody's like, my company's based upon Trino, it was developed at Facebook. It's used by some of the largest companies in the world right now. And these are open source projects. We provide an enterprise layer on top of that. But this is no joke anymore. There's a lot. I mean, that's the first thing I would do. I'll just go find maybe there's an open source software out there that can do maybe partially or maybe all of what I need out there. It can provide the features that I'm looking for. And so I said some are out of the box, ready to provide value, and other need work. So you might be worth it where you can pick that up. You can create like a fork of it or a branch of it, and you can copy that open source, and it's completely legal for you to do that. So most of this open source that you can, and you can maybe modify it for your needs. That might save you a lot of time. You might be tackling somebody else's tech debt, right? But there's plenty of good software out there to consider that. Just keep in mind that installation, upgrades, support, maintenance are just like you're building from scratch. You still have to do all that kind of stuff. You have still have to maintain it, look for bugs and that type of stuff. So it's just something, buyer beware. You get what you pay for a lot of times. And then obviously, and like I talked about, what my company is, many companies offer managed solutions, support and customizations, and that's what we do. We take a excellent, one of the best open source projects in the industry called Trino, and then we provide a managed solution on top of it. So we just run the clusters for you. We do support. We do all that stuff for you. We also have consulting, so resident solution architects and support as well. We have to make sure if you ran into something, we try to get it back into open source if you run into a bug or something like that. So we handle that for you. And a lot of our companies love it because they pay us, and a lot of that goes back into open source. So I think that's a good solution, or a good way open source works, is you have companies like ours adding enterprise value on top of that. And companies don't mind paying for software. They don't mind paying for this. And they know that, it's going to open source, and we have to do two things. We have to make money, but we have to make sure that we just don't starve the open source. So you'll see that in a lot of companies, they get very popular and they quote unquote starve open source, is they just stop contributing to it and it becomes just an island by itself. And that's what you don't want to see. You want to see a really, really strong open source community around the project that you're going to be included in your enterprise stack. So next is a good example of what we do is Starburst. So Galaxy, we provide, you can see Trino at the bottom here, and we build upon open source Trino, like I talked about. It was developed at Facebook, and so we provide all these major pillars there. So there's a lot of companies doing exactly what we're doing. They provide a platform. We provide extra security on top of that for some companies that need that connectivity, additional connectivity. So do we have some connectors that are going to be, take us a lot to implement, and proprietary systems and stuff. And then also support, is we have to make sure that we're able to support this. Like in the open source, you can try to go to like a Slack or a forum and post something, and you hope that somebody is going to help you. Something that we do is you open up a ticket and we're going to help you. We're going to help you no matter what, all the way through. And if it has to be where we improve open source, which we've done thousands of times, that's going to happen. So look for that as well. Any good, really good open source project out there is going to have like one or more companies out there that are doing kind of what we're doing. So next is build from scratch. So I'm going to talk about short-term and long-term. And the reason I talk about this is a lot of times you get tunnel vision when you're looking for to build a custom solution. I have a problem. I need to fix it, but I'm looking at, what is the long term of that? So really the short term is I want a quick fix to solve this application need. I want to get past this pain that I have. I want to find the resources and build and iterate over to these development phases that I have. I want to set up a support structure for it, figure out what my maintenance and roadmap is going to be. And I want to make sure that meets most of my requirements. We're relatively low effort. I don't want to go hire thousands of people just to build this application. But really the long term is the most important thing. Am I going to have those subject matter experts around that built that application for a long time? You'll see a lot of times, you just go look at LinkedIn. Majority of people don't stay at companies more than 2 years. So I have to make sure in 2 years from now or a year from now, that people that build this application, are they going to be around? Do I have good enough documentation? Do I have turnover documentation? What happens if I want to go to another off the shelf product? So those are the things to think about in the short term, not in the long term, right? Is think about, okay, that's great. I fixed a solution, but what happens? What happens in 2 years from now? I want to go fast forward 2 years from now. Am I going to be out of luck here? And then also continuous support and improvement. I want to continue to improve on this application. Not many applications I've ever seen, they develop it, it just sits there and nobody ever touches it. That usually doesn't happen. Usually end users want more features added to it. They want to, oh, this is cool, I want to add this. And then also, like long-term, is there a SaaS company offering similar features that I could just switch to? Because the biggest cost of any company usually is humans that I'm going to have sitting there, maintaining, supporting this application, and adding features to it. Is there something out there? So constantly keep looking out. Is there something out there that I could just, switch over to, export my data to the SaaS solution, and I'm ready to go? And also, is it good to turn into tech debt? You should see how many companies that I talk to on a weekly basis. They have this system here, this system here, and nobody wants to touch it. Your job is just to maintain, make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And that's the worst feeling in the world, because now you're stuck. You can't innovate. Companies need to innovate. Not only just software companies like mine, but companies need to innovate, period. How can they do that? Well, they have all this tech debt sitting around, not just applications, but data systems sitting around. So always be thinking about how can I make sure that if I need to be agile and move to one place to another, one application to another, how can I do this? And make sure to think about that now while you're building. What safeguards can I build into the application now so I can, knowing that in 2 years, the entire world's going to change and I need to get out, get into something else. And so, Roy, what is the future? We keep hearing artificial intelligence, right? I have Mike Myers up here, which is hilarious, but this is coming. I'm starting to see more and more of these application builders where, I have this Appian, which is kind of a cool little product I was doing some research on, where you're kind of basically building your application. It's kind of like no code or low code, as they call it, LCAP, low code application platform. So I think that's the first step, is to have an application that builds applications. You'll see this also with something called Airtable, which is really popular. So more of a spreadsheet type of an interface, but you can actually build applications within Airtable, and it's become a really popular product. And then so really it's the next thing I could see in the future is I need more of like I'm going to fill out a form and then I'm going to have an application. I want an application that does this, it does this. You basically build out requirements and it's going to build the application for you. That's something that I can see happening in the future, which is pretty exciting. I don't want to replace, me as a human, all these other developers out there, but to a certain point, we're starting to get to where there's not many new use cases or new businesses out there that really need custom applications. It's usually majority of it, or it overlaps greatly with other applications that are out there. So maybe we can combine a couple applications together to equal one. So I think that's going to be the future. But keep an eye on this, the couple ones that I've listed here in that category. I'm sure Gartner probably has a category called LCAP at that. So, well, thanks. Thanks for joining me. I wanted to cover a little bit what I see as the build versus buy over the last my 25 years of doing it. If you have any questions, you can reach out to Tom@starburstdata.com. If you have any questions about Starburst, about evaluating like what do you see in open source out there? Do you think this open source is a good value or not? What about these other software companies that provide it? That's kind of like what we do. So if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much.